So
Been happy
I actually look forward to this session because we've been so excited about where RCS is, and maybe we can get into a bit more meat and potatoes, I guess. That's the word.
Are you meat or my potatoes?
We'll find out. We'll find out.
But I think first maybe do a bit of introduction. Maybe Ru, maybe tell us a bit about yourself and what you do and Upland Software.
Yeah, thank you. So Rue Golding, responsible for product strategy at Upland Software. You won't have heard of Upland Software. A US software company has acquired around 30 organizations which form products. And I'm responsible for 6 products alongside product marketing and technical partnerships. Within that product portfolio, we've got a mix of customer feedback, we've got mobile products and email products. And looking at how we manage and support around 10 billion interactions on an annual basis.
Okay.
Dave Boddington, I'm the group product manager for digital channels over at Infobip. So I'm the product owner for RCS, RBM, RCS for business, RCS business messaging, whichever you want to call it. We'll come back to that later.
Okay.
And kind of sit within the leadership team on the internal business unit. We have focused on RCS.
Excellent. So I think we talked about this in our prep that we are I think even though RCS has been around RBM for a while, I think we are at the beginning of the journey of with iOS support. And so I want to get into the Apple announcement. What do you see this announcement and development impacting the broader adoption of RCS? Especially in markets where it's slower to adopt.
I think to start with, actually taking it a step back, to start with, I think we probably need to cut through a little bit the hype bubble, because I think if we was to believe the hyperbole of LinkedIn, RCS is available on every iOS device globally right now. And that's clearly not the case. As you say, I think we are just starting. I think Gavin earlier shared a list of those kind of 7 markets where RCS peer-to-peer is enabled. And within that, a subset of those carriers will be supporting RBM as well. So I think there's where there is full market coverage, I think that's where it becomes important. So friend of the show, Bern, posted this on LinkedIn, which I think is really important to note. I think when you look at markets, and again, there were some stats earlier that looked at different markets and iOS versus Android penetration. In Germany, for example, where all the carriers are enabled, supporting RBM, good collaboration. So it's a kind of really kind of mature market in RCS RBM terms. You're looking at 60% reach right now. Looking at the UK, again, 50-50 Android, iOS split, give or take, maybe 35% delivery rate right now across the board. So maybe double that to 70%. It's going to give you a scale for deliverability that's probably second only to SMS. In certain markets, absolutely, WhatsApp will have greater penetration. But I think that's really important, that we're going to be able to achieve that degree of scale. And what that then means in terms of some of the predictions, we did some work with Omdia, looking at kind of how RBM is going to be scaling across the regions. The growth is likely to be significant. How that growth curve is going to look, I think, is going to be really interesting. So it takes me back to kind of the earlier point is we need to kind of tread quite carefully here. I say there is absolutely a hype bubble right now, but iOS is going to be game changing. Realistically, I think when we were looking at kind of conversations around RBM, and again, we're going to touch on it maybe a little bit later in terms of some of those barriers. One of the biggest barriers was reach. And what you can achieve as a brand, as a platform provider serving kind of various use cases. There's the need for that business case to justify the work to support a channel. And if you're only achieving 20, 30, 35% delivery rate, it's probably hard to justify that. If you're achieving 60, in Germany's case, 70, 80, that becomes a much easier conversation. Add on to that then the benefits we all talk about in terms of the deliverability, in terms of the verified branded sender, in terms of the rich capabilities, the conversational use cases it starts to unlock. then they become real kickers in terms of that conversation. But the starting point is absolutely scale.
Yeah, and I want to kind of piggyback on that. And maybe this is a question to Ru about, since you are the platform provider, taking the RCS channel and adding, and integrating with other channel and building use cases for your customers. And, we know it's a journey that is in the beginning stage. Can you elaborate on what are you doing now? What are the use cases? How does it compare? How do you go to market with RCS and SMS from your perspective?
I think it's really interesting because where we sit, so you've got the carriers, the aggregators, then us. So where we are currently, and that's why some of the team are here today as well, taking lots of notes. It's an education process at the moment because RCS has been coming for a long time. And I think the team will remember about November, well, it was November last year when we were, I don't know if anyone here is from Meta, but we were looking at implementing WhatsApp for one of our products. And then some guy at Apple made an announcement about RCS. So we kind of pivoted to look at how we can implement RCS for all our products. And we've got a diversity of products in terms of we're serving SMS customers in the MPO space in the US, and then marketing customers in the UK, then global customer feedback programs. So you're looking at all these different challenges and use cases. How can we optimize that feedback process? So can conversational RCS fit into that? Feel like it could, definitely. From a progressive advocacy perspective in the US, we were sending, and loads of different providers were sending millions and millions of text messages. Some of our US colleagues are receiving 20 text messages a day with regards to the election. How do you cut through that noise? So there's a play around trust and verifying that message, the trust component, and also the number of times I've been asked how you can tell if a text message has been read. You can't. It's a really noddy point, but with RCS, you can tell whether it's been read. And that just adds that additional conversion metric.
Also building on that, do you also see then using that as a data point to inform kind of further conversational messaging based on that?
Definitely. And it's something, it was snowing where I came from, so I missed a little bit of the data conversation. But that added component around data conversion and how useful that can be from a data journey perspective is so valuable. But I think primarily where we are is we're still in the education phase. So we've got a number of customers in the US who are looking at RCS. We've talked about verified sending and security. That's a fairly big hook, certainly in the US market. And I think that is an opportunity to work on, but we're very important, but we're down the value chain. We're arguably closer to the customers from a platform point of view. So we're working with them to establish how they can get over that, bridge the chasm, if you like, from an SMS to an RCS point of view. Slightly more expensive. Okay, what's it going to do for me? It's verified and secure. That might not be enough in some cases. So the advancement of where it can go is what we're trying to trade on at the moment. But frankly, we're still in education mode at the moment.
So on that note, I mean, I think we are ready, and I think we are early, but I think, so what are the barriers to the adoption from your point of view, both from the platform as well as from, aggregator side? What are the challenges? What do we need to do? What can the ecosystem does to make it, scalable and grow in a trajectory that we should be after the announcement of iOS?
How many Infobip people are here? Commercials. So commercials it's a little bit of a challenge for us in terms of we're going through it at the moment. So we are an ARR-based business. So we're trying to commit customers to their usage. How much RCS are you going to buy? Don't know. I don't work in sales anymore. I used to, but they don't know how many RCS-enabled customers they've got. And they don't know how many they're going to send. So we don't know how much. We've got the price point, and it's a little bit more than SMS. We'll work on that later. A little bit more than SMS, but you've got the value piece and then the adoption. So conversation last night with our chief product officer, I'm like, So analysts suggest that there's going to be 80% coverage of RCS in North America by end of H1. Cool. There's a lot of contingencies there. You've got the carriers in the US. So it's only Verizon, T-Mo, maybe by the end of the year, and AT&T. And then you've got iOS downloads as well. So you've got barriers to entry from that perspective, adoption, being able to talk coherently around what those value propositions and use cases are for the customer. And then you've got the commercials. There are challenges.
Yeah.
What about you?
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they're all kind of absolutely valid points. I think they're probably replicated across multiple markets. I think there's, in terms of challenges, I'd probably pick up on three. Firstly being coverage, reach, full market coverage. I mentioned kind of a few markets where there is full market coverage. There was quite a bit of talk earlier about the hyperscalers, kind of in the SMS space. Realistically, for the channel to be meaningful for them, they want certain key markets and a critical mass of those key markets, which is challenging. And it's for perfectly understandable reasons in terms of scaling out RBM into additional markets. That growth is probably going to come, we would see, assume second half next year and through into 2026. So I think that's going to hold it back in certain markets and in certain regions particularly, where you'll have kind of lighthouse markets in certain regions, in certain markets, but the ability to scale beyond that will probably be kind of restricted. Consistency, and that does touch on the pricing point we mentioned there in terms of, and again, picking up on some of the conversations before the break around kind of A2P SMS pricing. With carrier control of the pricing, I think in certain markets there's fantastic kind of coordination between the carriers where they can, following the kind of the defined model. But we would fully expect in certain markets, certain carriers to not go rogue, but deviate. Look at how they can adjust certain markets. And we see that already in certain markets where they may be looking at different pricing models to support different types of use case. And I think that, in one hand, can absolutely help to stimulate a particular use case and potentially a particular vertical, but it can also make it more challenging to communicate it. So you've always got the flip side of the coin in those kind of conversations. Yeah. And I think the biggest one, though, would be awareness and understanding. We had a brief conversation with James a little bit earlier around that, and it is absolutely still a challenge. I think there were both there's a couple of slides. Robert and Gavin both referenced stats in terms of consumer preference for communications earlier. Both of them had SMS maybe 3-4 times higher than RCS. Now, I refuse to believe that's because consumers don't want to receive RCS. So it can only be because they don't know what it is. Now, that's then a challenge. If consumers don't know what it is, they're not expecting it. They're not maybe pushing the brands. The brands then aren't pushing the likes of Upland and ourselves. That becomes a real challenge. But also in terms of brands themselves and the markets in general, I think, and that's one of maybe the good sides of the Apple announcement, it has driven a little bit of awareness. I was in India last week for the Google event in New Delhi. And whilst India maybe only has 4 or 5% iOS coverage, those 4 or 5% are likely to be decision makers, key stakeholders in businesses. So actually then being able to see a message on their phone becomes really, really important because you need them to see it and approve it. And you need them to be aware of it. So I think that awareness and understanding is probably going to be the biggest challenge that the ecosystem needs to address. And that comes from Google, that comes from carriers, that comes from CPaaS providers like ourselves and others for sure.
I think it's interesting as well. We're talking about omnichannel. RCS, great, cool. There's lots of channels. So we have pressure on us. We put pressure on the likes of Infobip to be able to provide those channels because ultimately we need to think about the customer and you've got to meet the customer where they are. And there is a lost generation. I love SMS. Been in the SMS market for 20 years, but there is a lost generation. So I did a little bit of research. My 2 daughters, they don't send text messages. They don't receive text messages.
They're on Snapchat, I think.
Yeah. When I ask them to come downstairs, I have to send them a snap. That's the best way of communicating. So, are they going to be an adopter of RCS? Probably not, unless we make it really valuable. There's a trade-off here in terms of value. What am I going to get in terms of providing you with my mobile number, and what do I get in exchange for that? That value exchange in terms of it's a rich, seamless experience. It's engaging. I can do a lot more through this. is this where you've got the confluence of maybe email and a mobile app is actually where RCS, I think it promises to potentially be that. So I think Lola's as alpha, Gen's alpha, is that a thing? Yeah? Gen Z and alpha?
Gen Z.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know
young,
what next
12.
alphabet might be, but
Yeah.
A, B.
Yeah.
But
And sorry, I was just going to pick up on that because I think that awareness and that kind of maybe demand's too strong a word, but let's use it for now. It needs to be a push and pull mechanic, right? We as an industry absolutely are pushing that, and that needs to flow through the value chain. But also, as I kind of touched on earlier, the more we can have consumers and brands pulling and wanting that channel more importantly. I kind of use the example a few times. The first time you receive an RCS message from a delivery company with a logo, you maybe don't get blown away by it, but you notice it. Then when you receive a message from a delivery company that's sent over SMS, you notice the difference. So you probably implicitly trust that less than you would do otherwise. So consumers will then start to become kind of, they'll be the frogs that get boiled, right? And become slowly more aware of that as a channel. And then those consumers ultimately are decision makers, stakeholders within business and within brands. So how do we, again, as an ecosystem, not just talk to ourselves, but actually talk to other industries, other verticals, whether it be marcoms, whether it be communication planners. How are we getting into those spaces to communicate what RCS is and how it can be used?
so we talk about brands because I think maybe that's the topic I want to focus now. Brands, how are they reacting? You work with brands. I'm sure you guys do too.
Honestly.
How are they reacting to it? How are they comparing it? How are they integrating it in their own marketing channel as a part of omnichannel? What's going on right now? And
I'm going to go back to education. So they're considering, so certainly from a US point of view, considering how they can replace SMS with RCS. That's how they're seeing it. We're not necessarily pitching it that way, but they see the trust and the security associated with it. That's probably the main thing that's driving the adoption of it. There's been a lot of awareness. It's almost been coming for so long that people have got, a bit bored of it, send it birthday cards every year. But it's now here, and I think our brands are looking at it in terms of this can be an option, and we're finding that they're talking about options for it. So polling locators is quite a big thing for a number of our organisations that we work with. Using it for fundraising, more of a conversational experience as well. So certainly looking at it from that perspective, but I think what's interesting when you talk about an omnichannel experience, they're complementary channels versus I see certainly the narrative that's building up in the US is that RCS replacing SMS. So you're not getting another channel, SMS will be going away.
the replacement.
Yeah. So it's going from analog to digital, really. It's kind of seen as an upgrade.
Dave, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. I think there's an awful lot of interest, but I think guarded interest or kind of measured interest, really just because there's still a degree of uncertainty. And I kind of go back to, again, and Rue made a really good point there. We've talked about it a long time. So I think we've cried wolf quite a few times about RCS. So we need to be kind of make sure that we're managing. We always talk about managing consumers' expectations. Let's manage our clients' expectations about what can and can't be done and when it can and can't be done. So we certainly see a lot of pick and shift. What are we doing on SMS, MMS? How can we move that and replicate that? Because it's the path of least resistance for a brand to take what they're doing, and it's also ultimately really nicely measurable. In terms of deliverability, in terms of kind of response rates, engagement, etc. You can easily compare between the two channels. You're comparing apples with apples. I think those kind of more advanced use cases, you'll absolutely have those trailblazers that really want to dive straight into it, your digital natives and the like. But there's they will be kind of lighthouse examples. I think really at the moment brands are really interested and want to try it, but equally they don't necessarily want to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater quite yet in terms of what they're currently doing.
Yeah. So looking ahead, 12, 6, 18 months, where do you, this evolution of RCS, I would say today, what are your predictions, I guess, if I may say so? Or can we even predict?
Is this being recorded, yeah? You're going to come back to this. I think it's a slow roll, frankly. I don't want to dampen any fires here around RCS, but it will be a slow roll. From my point of view, I mean, Dave touched on it, those lighthouse examples, those digital-first organisations that are going to be the ones, do you know what, this is going to be the vanguard of our communication strategy. Until that happens, until there's a bit more, again, looking at the room, education from the carriers as well, I could ask any of my friends about RCS and they'd be like, don't know what that is, don't really know. So there needs to be more examples, there needs to be more education. And I think with that, you'll see this slow roll, but it's going to take some time I'm not saying it's going to replace, I don't think it will, but there's going to be a slow roll to see how those use cases can actually come to the fore, because there's obviously 3 different ways which you can use RCS, and who's going to be the ones that really take those forward. So, sorry, I think a slow roll over the next 12 to 18 months. And
slow is a good thing.
Yeah.
And Dave?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, kind of, and it's probably by virtue of being kind of that kind of one step up in terms of the value chain, I think it's going to be dynamic, I think is the best way of putting it, right? You're going to see very different approaches in different markets and different regions. Some where, there's not a lot happening. Some where new markets open up, goes absolutely crazy. Carriers come on board, look at different pricing models, again, challenges to deal with. So I think from our perspective, and I'm sure kind of since you'll be feeling the same, it's going to be a really dynamic kind of 18 months or so, while we're dealing with those kind of maybe twists and turns in the road. I think what's positive is all of those twists and turns will be leading in the right direction. So I think if the question was to be rephrased, what do I see about in terms of maybe kind of 5, 6, 8 years? For me, it's inevitable. I don't think there's a question mark certainly from my perspective and from coming from Infobip's perspective. RCS will be kind of the de facto channel. It's really about how we get there and how we get there with the least number of cuts and bruises along the way.
I think there's an opportunity for us, and then flow that up to the likes of Infobip, to be challenged by our customers as well, because we haven't got all the answers in any way in terms of how could you use this technology. I think that's a great opportunity, certainly because we're slightly closer to the customers. How do we fit into their channel mix, and how do they think they can use RCS as well, with what it promises to be, the carousels, the auto prompts, the conversational messaging. We've got a bunch of ideas, but frankly, we don't know their business as well as they do. So that agility to be able to take on board those different use cases.
So I'd like to open the question, if anything, from the floor or from the, I guess, online audience.
Announcement then, before you thank the panel. I have Stephen Breen's computer, so please come and get it for me.
So we have I have one last question. So this is a global. RCS is going to be global, so there's going to be a need for cross-regional collaboration, innovation in North America, Europe. We're not working, as much as it's a channel that has to work across the ecosystem, because your customers and your brands are global customers. And so, I guess the question is that how are these adoption are being driven in different markets? I mean, what's going on in Africa, what's going on in Europe, North America, and how does the cross-global nature, obviously with iOS and Apple and devices, those will help, but are there any other factors?
Yeah, I think actually that's kind of one of the more really interesting areas of the channel for me at the moment, in terms of how one region, market, or region, and their behaviour, their activity will start to influence others. Because I think we will see differences, and we are kind of maybe already. I think if you look at North America, right? So just coming on board now, I think there's an awful lot that will be applied into the RCS channel that already exists from SMS in terms of the verification, the brand verification, the campaign use case verification that is already applied in the short code and 10 DLC market that will kind of roll into the RCS market. And that then will serve as a really interesting blueprint for other markets that are coming on board and or already active in the channel to see how they can replicate that and can they use that as a best practice. For example, if we look at Europe, the markets that are kind of more mature digitally, for want of a better way of putting it, UK, France, Germany, Spain, that are active in the channel. I think we'll start to see more of the kind of use cases that we always talk about for RCS, the conversational use cases, replacing the behavior and functionality that's available within a brand app, for example, into messaging, into the conversational channel. Because I think as brands start to look at getting bang for their buck, it's a really realistic alternative. So I think we'll start to see that, which again is something that can be replicated back into, for example, back into North America. Africa and India are really interesting. So India, I think I saw there was a stat from the session last week. 90% of online adults message a business weekly. So messaging is absolutely habitual. Some of the examples that were shared at that session were really interesting. Things like wallet integration for travel tickets and the like. Now, they're the kind of use case that are talked a lot, but are kind of seen, but okay, we'll look at that in the future. They're doing it now already. So I think India as a market for really trying out some of those more advanced use cases with the support of Google and the carriers is fantastic, because again, that takes something that could be replicated elsewhere. And then if you look at Africa, it's for RCS now, it's a relatively kind of slow, not really existent as a market. But if you look at it as a kind of region in general, no fixed landline, limited infrastructure. So banking use cases, for example, is all carried out on mobile. So as RCS starts to move into that channel, what kind of use cases can be developed there that can again be pick and shifted and replicated in other markets? So because you have these different behaviours across different markets, I think it's going to be really interesting to see, again, maybe not in the next 18 months, but in the next 3, 4, 6, 8 years, how those kind of regions start to do things that are quite unique to their region and their behaviours, but can be then replicated in other markets for sure.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
totally agree, Dave. It's that globalization should provide best practice sharing, knowledge transfer as well. So the examples there around the Indian market using wallet passes for travel, being able to bring that across from a global perspective or to individual markets, and also that point that I mentioned around being challenged by customers around what they want to do. I think having that flow of information and sharing of knowledge is really where everyone gains and everyone takes a step up in terms of that additional digital channel.
Okay, on that positive note, thank you very much, Dave and Ru.
Thank you.